Welcome. How are you doing today, Cliff?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm in Florida for the winter, enjoying the warm weather, and I hope you have a warm winter where you are.
Well, even the word Florida right now is difficult to hear. This morning was very cold.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all relative, but it was pretty cold. And I had a meeting with somebody today, and like all things coronavirus, we try to do it outdoors. So it was even colder than it would have been on a typical day. But Cliff, a lot of people in the shul right now don't know you, which is hard to imagine because you've been a part of the congregational family for so many years. So if you could just kind of introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself so people know who you are.
Sure, I'll be glad to. My name is Clifford Altschull, and I'm originally from Martinsville, Virginia, a very small Jewish community there. At that time, about 40 families. And I went through the normal process of growing up. I went to college at University of Richmond, and I graduated with ROTC as part of my degree program, and I went into the service later, which I'll discuss as a second lieutenant. I got married in June of 68 to my late wife, Rose Deborah Harab, who became Rose Deborah Altschull. And I must say also, I have two sisters that are still alive. One of them is a member of Beth Israel, Beverly Sobel, and the other used to be a resident in Richmond, have moved to Atlanta with her husband, Naomi Meyer. So a lot of people in the congregation probably know them also. So anyway, right after I got married, I had a short stint with the company. I was hired by Bethlehem Steel Corporation, working at Sparrows Point in Baltimore. And so then I'm trying to think of how this correlated to come down. I have to remember how the sequence of events went. But I went into active duty in March of 68. And we did not come back to Richmond yet. We were in Baltimore. That's what it was. My late wife went back to live with her parents in Chevy Chase. And I was on my way from that point. You want to get into the military things or?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll get there. Just maybe a little bit more background. People don't know that you were president of
Oh,
the
yes, I forgot.
Jewish congregation,
How
and
could I forget?
quite a major part of our history. Certainly can't forget that. But people certainly hadn't heard about Martinsville. Martinsville only had one congregation. Is that correct?
Oh, to have that was lucky.
Okay,
Yeah, we
okay,
only had 40 families, yes, but it
that's
was
fair. Well, it was a very rich.
relatively vibrant Jewish community in those days. I have no contact since then. But you
Right.
brought up my relationship to Beth Israel. That's a very funny, interesting story. We moved to Richmond not long after I came back from Vietnam in 1970. And I had the experience of living in Richmond at the University of Richmond and going to Bethel for services, particularly Yontif. And they had services upstairs and downstairs. So I applied to them when we got to Virginia, and I forget what exactly was in June or whatever, about getting Yontif seats in September. And I was told you had to be a member in order to get seats. And I said, I'm not looking for free. I'm not a student anymore. I could pay for it. And they said, well, you either have a member or you're not a member. So I was talking to Benny Sobel, Jerry Sobel, my brother-in-law. His father was still alive. May rest in peace. And he said, oh, once you come to Beth Israel, we got this nice young rabbi, Edward Davis, and we'd love to have you. And so I gave him $150 and we joined for the Yontif services. And shortly thereafter, we applied for and got membership in the shul and became very close in that proposition with Beth Israel. And not long after that, we had our first child, my son, Mark,
Mhm.
and we had the bris and so forth. And about a year later, my father passed away. So I got involved going to Minyan every morning for 11 months and
Wow.
got to know a lot more about the synagogue and
Mhm.
some holidays that were newer to me that I had not really observed all those years. And
Now, I
became,
know you've shared with me your special relationship with Rabbi Davis, but maybe you
right,
could speak to that because you all kept in touch over
yes, we still do.
years.
Still
Maybe
do.
you could speak to that really special and long time relationship with Rabbi Davis.
Right. Yes. And that that relationship's even through today. And
Yeah.
he's retired a year and a half or 2 years ago.
Mhm.
But anyway, yes, I got very close to him and he became my shia and gave me advice on things and what to do and this, that, and the other. And of course, when it came time, my daughter was born 2 years after my son, and it was Edie. And
Mhm.
so we had a Pignia Ben.
Yeah.
No, we didn't. I'm wrong. I'm wrong about that. We had a naming, is what we had.
Okay.
And then And my wife got involved in the educational system because she was not working at the time. She was at home, a graduate and so forth. And so she was running the Sunday school program that we had. And that time we had quite a few number of kids. The congregation had really grown.
Mhm.
It was well over 200 families, and it was like about 60 or 70 kids involved at one point.
Wow. Now you have a special relationship to kids and students in education. I know you've been involved. Maybe if you could let people know a little bit about your philanthropic interests along those lines.
Okay, well, we're jumping back. That's fine.
Yes.
That's after my wife passed away
Mhm.
in February of '68,
Mhm.
and I had just retired a year earlier, and so we had time during. She had breast cancer that metastasized in her brain. She
Mhm.
lived for a total of about 11 months, and while she was in hospice, we had a lot of conversations. And I said, I'd like to do something because she was 90% of my success in life. I had
Mhm.
recently sold, I was in the sign business. I didn't mention that either, for about 30 years, electric signs in Richmond. And so I said, she said, what do you have in mind? I said, well, I was in Rotary in Richmond all those years. And now I was retired up at Lake Monticello, where we ended up. We're jumping around here. But
Yeah.
anyway, I said, what do you think about doing an endowment in your memory? Because she was a guidance counselor, one of the first from VCU in
Mhm.
elementary guidance. If I set up an endowment in your memory, and she said, well, that would be fine, but I don't want to be a martyr. I said, you won't be a martyr, but you'll leave me something to pay back
Mhm.
all that you did for me and for other children. So we did that.
Wow.
And I put up $10,000 as a start base.
Mhm.
And since then, we've raised in excess of $400,000.
Wow.
We've given away about $90,000. And
Wow.
it's for young children in the elementary school group in that county
Mhm.
that are less fortunate.
Mhm.
We have a shoe program. We buy shoes and take them to Walmart. We have a winter coat program. We
Wow.
have a summer camp program. We have a reading program. We've done a lot of special events. So it's
That's
growing
really
very, very
amazing.
nicely. Yeah.
That is very fascinating. Now, I do want to get into Vietnam because it's such an important part of our history as Americans, and I think it's fascinating to look at it from a Jewish perspective. So, if you could talk about your experience there, especially as a Jewish soldier, and what you think people need to know today about that part of our background.
Yes, and I'm still an active veteran. I went to Vietnam. Well, I graduated in June of '67 as a second lieutenant, and I was called to active duty in March of '68. Um, Not long after, let's see, I got called. Then I got married in June. So during that period of time, my first stop was in Fort Lee. I was a quartermaster. I was there for 5 months for training, and then I went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and was Vietnamese language a half a day and jungle physical training. Believe it or not, that was 80 pounds and 50 years ago. But anyway, I was there 3 months, and then they sent me to Fort Bliss, Texas, for extended language,
Hmm.
and there was a language lab there. We were there for 4 months, and
Mhm.
then I went to Vietnam in February of '69, and I was greeted in Saigon to get basic setup, and then I was moved all the way up north to Da Nang, which is the northern part of South Vietnam,
Mhm.
what they call the first area logistic command. I was advisory for the quartermaster group. There were quartermaster, there was all kinds of logistical things that we served. And I was there for about 13 months. During that time, when I got to Vietnam, I became a first lieutenant. So the religious part of this thing is interesting because in those days we had the draft, which doesn't exist anymore. One of the biggest mistakes I think our country made was when Vietnam ended, the draft ended, and we
Mhm.
went to all volunteer army.
Hmm.
The difference being all walks of life being called in, and the patriotism, even though there was a lot of unrest about Vietnam, that basically was the de-embarkation point in my mind of when patriotism started lingering. And
Mhm.
it's gotten worse to me over the years.
Mhm.
So anyway, we had a tenement rabbi who was younger than I was. I was 22. He was like 21.
Oh, wow.
And there were like 7 Jewish guys in our area that we got together with. We got somehow, I forget how we got put together now. And we would have services on an irregular, regular basis. But the most interesting time came when it was Yontif.
Hmm.
And the Jewish Welfare Board would send over prayer books, kosher meals, prayer shawls, you name it, we had it all. And we met at China Beach.
Hmm.
And of course, China Beach was right there in Da Nang. It was an R&R center, so they had a big pavilion we could meet at. So the young rabbi, and I spoke with 2 or 3 other guys, And so you're going to be the KBI. I said, okay, I'm not that qualified, but I'll help any way I can. But he said, we're expecting between 300 and 500 GIs.
Oh
I
my
said, are you
goodness.
kidding me? He said,
Wow.
well, most will not be Jewish. We know that. They
Uh-huh.
want the days off for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. They'll have time off. But we accept them. Who knows? We may even get a convert anyway.
Mhm.
So we were prepared for that. So things came up like when we got started, these people started coming in. And believe me, you knew who was Jewish and who wasn't. That's the interesting thing that I found in my life that really changed, because I became very sensitive as to who was a Jew.
Mhm.
And you don't have to be fluent Hebrew. You don't have to be Orthodox. You can be Reform. You can be whatever. The point is, there's something about Jewish people that
Mhm.
touches you, and it's like a heart-to-heart thing. So they would come in. So the rabbi says, you're going to give out the honors. He said, how are you going to do it? I said, very simple. I'll ask anybody who would like to have an aliyah, and I'm sure there'll be maybe 4 or 5 people raise their hand, and we'll do it that way. So we got through it, and it was interesting.
That is interesting.
Both of those
How long were
situations.
you? So, were there any? I know it was a hard time, but did you have any fond memories of being over there?
Well, yes. Well, first of all, my fond memories, because I served the purpose of advising 3 groups in the first ALC area, which is from Da Nang all the way up through Hue to the demilitarized zone to get to North
Wow.
Vietnam.
Mhm.
One of my main duty was they had set up and started building commissaries
Mhm.
for the Vietnamese soldiers as they were, small buildings and all. And then the second was graves registration to deal with the dead.
Hmm.
And it was a good correlation between Judaism and what the Vietnamese, they were Buddhists primarily.
Hmm.
But anyway, and the third group was a farm system for disabled soldiers, a pig farm for a Jewish guy. I was dealing with a pig farm.
Hmm.
And so these like 70 or 80 guys that had lost limbs, whatever and all, but they were very proficient, and they raised vegetables and they raised pigs. They had some cattle, not many. And that we did that to provide food for the military, so they would be able to feed the soldiers.
Mhm.
I found it very interesting that I became very close with my counterparts. So I had other Vietnamese officers in each area. And the
Wow.
commissary, the American people, or the American government, I should say, had this idea they were going to provide foodstuffs, not money. So they shipped, without any discussion with the Vietnamese, things they thought that they could do to start the commissary, sell the goods, and then start buying more goods on the outside economies from different worlds in Europe and whatever. So they sent things the Vietnamese did not like. They sent small cans of Campbell's soup. They sent Vienna sausage. They sent all kinds of cigarettes that the GIs would like, but not the Vietnamese guys. Chesterfields, all the non-filtered cigarettes. And the Vietnamese only smoked menthol cigarettes, like Salem or whatever. So we had the job, illegally or legally, under the table, to take all of these goods and take them to places like Saigon and sell them, so we could go back and buy sugar and other things, including menthol cigarettes and all.
Have you
The other
been
thing,
able to share these stories with your children?
oh yes, yes. And my children didn't believe any of this until my daughter went to Vietnam many years later, just before she was married to her husband. They were traveling on Mali, so they went to Thailand and Vietnam.
Oh,
And once they went through the War Crimes Museum in Saigon, they
wow.
realized that everything I told them was true. They also told me that Da Nang did not have China Beach. It didn't exist. I said, you think that they took the ocean and the China Beach away, or they changed the name? Oh, they must have just changed the name, because they had high rises there and this and that. So it's all very interesting. Raise registration, the Vietnamese believe very much the same as Jewish people. They don't believe in embalming. They believe in burial as soon as possible. Of course, because of the water table, they had to bury in mounds. But they built a mortuary, and I finished it with them, with like 7 different lab areas. And they sent over like 500 kegs of embalming fluid. They don't embalm. And so these embalming kegs of fluid were just rotting. And the Da Nang Air Base had the American graves registration was running out of fluids. So we would give them the fluids without just marking them off the inventory. And I worked with them occasionally, which later I served in the Cheva Kadisha, Beth Israel, for about 20 years before I moved.
That's fascinating. So what would you like people today, let's say Richmonders today, to know about this part of our history? What do you think is important for them to take away from it?
Well, I guess the most important thing was that we lost 58,000 men, mostly men, some women, in Vietnam. The only result is Vietnam is a safe place for people to go to visit. And also, even though it's communist, it has become a place that's safe to travel, and nothing like what we're dealing with in Iraq and Afghanistan and places like that. So it was
What about the Jewish community? What about people in KBI specifically who are going to be watching this? What do you think that they should kind of think of in terms of their Judaism and in terms of this war that Jewish war veterans contributed to? What should they take away or know from it?
well, the fact that the Jewish people in all the wars, going all the way back to World War I, have always been represented very, very strongly. And
Right.
it's the same in Vietnam because it was the draft. And I ran into many Jewish guys who were draftees
Right.
that served along. Because I was with the Vietnamese troops and advising all these guys. So I never was with the American forces, very, very little. So I don't know much about that. But again, to the person, I would say that 90% of them were very patriotic. There were a lot of GIs that went in were angry because there was an unrest. It wasn't a very popular war by any means. There was a lot of demonstrations, something like you see now in reverse, not so much burning buildings down, but being chaotic as far as that goes. And I guess the worst thing for me is when I came back and I got finished, I went through Oakland, California. As we were being transported, people circled our buses.
Wow.
And it's like we were some type of enemy of the American people.
Wow.
Nobody on that bus, 99%, didn't go there because they wanted to go.
Right.
They just did it that way.
That's very difficult.
The other thing I was going to tell you that during my time there, I had one nice experience. We had a change in command about 8 months after I was there. And the person that came in to run our group was Norman Schwarzkopf. At that time, he was a infantry soldier, and he served 2 tours in Vietnam, and he wasn't anywhere near a general at that point. But he served with us, and he came, and we had to help him to learn what we were doing. And I carried something forward from that the rest of my life. When he had us together, it was 20 officers and non-coms. He said, I'll lean on you to help me. And I want you to remember one thing throughout your time here and the rest of your life. Every time you come to a point of having a decision to make, just keep this in your mind. Do the right thing. So if every time you run into a problem or situation using your own intellect, if you do that, 95% of the time, you're going to do the right thing. Fast forward 30 some years, he came to Richmond to speak at we had a Rotary group that brought famous people in to speak, and he flew in. And I had to go to the airport to pick him up with 2 other guys.
Oh my God.
He didn't remember my name, but he remembered me. He's a phenomenal guy.
Yeah. Wow.
And I said, look, I remember you very well. And I remember what you taught us about do the right thing. And that's why I'm in Rotary and things like this that I deal with.
Really good. And president of the shul and contributing to the shul and all of that. That's amazing, to have that extraordinary experience and to kind of bring it back to Richmond with you. That's really amazing. Do you have any closing thoughts or final thoughts about, let's say the role of Beth Israel within Richmond or the changes that you've seen in the shul over the years, and what you hope for the synagogue in the future?
Well, of course, the synagogue has gone through many transitions, including many rabbis. And how long are you there now, Rabbi? 10 years?
Yeah, this is my 10th year.
That's what I'm guessing. So you're in the longevity side of things. Rabbi Davis was the first rabbi that was there when I was there, and we went through several. We had mostly good guys. They were good rabbis, but we had our ups and downs. We had a tumult with a cantor years ago that we replaced in Cantor Waldman, who'd been there for the beginning of time. His name is up on that wall behind you there. But anyway, I think Beth Israel has transitioned into being a much more involved in Orthodox Judaism, because a very high percentage of the synagogue when I first came there was not Orthodox. They were historically conservative and they were traditional, but they weren't Orthodox, as I was not. But I think between Rabbi Days all the way up to your time, everybody's brought one thing or another. The most interesting thing I thought was, for years, there was a great controversy about the wall between the men and the women.
The mechitza, right.
Mechitza, because the mechitza, when the synagogue was built, was nominal. It was very low.
Right.
So I met with a group that was like 5 of us to brainstorm an idea with, again, I'm terrible with things, Rabbi
Roan.
Roan. he was very passive about it. So listen, let's do it. We'll do it. You know, it'll be okay. That's
Yeah.
the way he walked. He said it won't be obtrusive. We'll find a way. So I came up with the idea of using glass
Right.
because I was in the sign business. We had people that sandblasting. We could sandblast the symbols on the pizza, and the ladies could still see well, but there would be a division, and it's worked out extremely well, I think, because a lot of ladies that are now members of Beth Israel that didn't have an Orthodox background are not so stunned, because a lot of Orthodox shows, as you know, have mechitzas where it's totally hidden video. They are just not seen. It's just a big blockage. So we have a moderate thing in that respect.
A lot of interesting changes over the years. I know, we missed having you at the holidays, and like we missed everybody. That's why we're doing this whole series to try to connect with people from their home as we all kind of go through the pandemic. But it's fascinating to hear this history and how it's impacted you, and by extension, how it's impacted us. And we're very proud of our veterans. And
let me just add one other quick story. A lot of people don't know about, and that's the effect of Agent Orange. Okay. Some people have read about this and so forth, because where I served in Vietnam, and it was quite a bit wide area of about 140 miles. I was exposed to Agent Orange in different places. Not that I knew that at the time. Right. There was a legal battle for over 25 years. And finally, at the same time, my late wife was in hospice, passing away of cancer. It came out that it had been approved. So I had time. I was with her, night and days, and I filed all the paperwork and all. I finally got approved to get Agent Orange coverage. I was 20% for different illnesses, not important. And they back paid me for like 24 years. Wow. All of that. And then recently, during Trump's time, and there were some good things with Trump, there's some good things with every president. He was very concentrated on the veterans, and he's done a great job with that. And so if you need health services, which I don't depend on them, it's much more readily available. And he expanded through his group. They expanded the Agent Orange coverage. So last year, I was told by the VA to go to the hospital. I got checked, and instead of being 20% disabled, I got 45% disability. So it's not a lot of money, but it's repaying for what I went through, and I'll carry these things the rest of my life.
Yes, people don't know about Agent Orange, and today it's a major part of that conflict and what people had to go through.
That's true.
Any other closing thoughts before we sign off?
No, but Beth Israel's still a part of my life, even though I'm a long distance away. I live in Charlottesville when I'm back in Virginia, but I do come from time to time, particularly. Sure. And I really miss the Yontif services this year, because it's like a rejuvenation. It's like a uniting. And to come into the shul over the last several years and to see about 70% of the congregants I don't know. I don't know them. They don't know me. But it's good to see a lot of youth coming in. And I know that the outreach for all the families, and you have a lot of young people in the synagogue, much more than we can. Much more. It's
nice to see, I'm sure for you, who's invested so much in the shul, to see that the average age getting much younger. And but that's why we're doing these videos, so people get to know each other, because a lot of people don't know each other, especially when they can't interact during the pandemic. So hopefully people will learn a little bit about you, and over the course of the series we'll learn about each other. But it's good connecting, and thank you very much for taking the time to share.
It's my pleasure.